Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you felt like everything was stacked against you, where the odds of success seem slim to none? In today's epic story of the Bible, the story of Jacob's time in Haran will encourage you. It's a powerful reminder that when we trust in God's faithfulness and act with wisdom, He can turn even the most challenging circumstances into opportunities for blessing. When we last left Jacob, he was caught in a family feud, married to two sisters who were constantly vying for his affection. But during this relationship chaos, we see God's faithfulness to provide for Jacob and fulfill the promises made to him at Bethel. After the birth of Joseph, Jacob decides it's time to return to his homeland. But before he can leave, he must negotiate with his father-in-law, Laban, for his wages. Laban, recognizing that his prosperity is due to God's favor on Jacob, is reluctant to let him go. So Jacob proposes a plan. He will continue to tend Laban's flocks, but any speckled or spotted sheep born will be his wages. Laban agrees, but then schemes to stack the odds in his favor by removing all the multicolored animals from the flock. But God is not thwarted by human trickery. He appears to Jacob in a dream, instructing him in a breeding technique that causes the stronger animals to bear spotted offspring. As a result, Jacob's flocks increase rapidly, much to the frustration of Laban and his sons. There are several key lessons we can draw from this story. First, we see that God's faithfulness to provide for His children is not dependent on perfect circumstances. Jacob isn't in a good situation. He's far from home, working for a deceitful father-in-law, and caught in a complicated family dynamic. Yet, even there, God causes him to prosper. We need to know that no matter where we find ourselves, God has not abandoned us. His presence and provision are not limited by our location or inadequacies. And second, we see the importance of acting with wisdom and integrity in unfair situations. Jacob could have thrown up his hands in despair when Laban changed his wages or schemed against him. Instead, he trusted God's guidance and used the knowledge God gave him to work diligently and strategically. His success was a combination of God's divine provision and His practical wisdom. It's a great model for us. When we face challenges, we can seek God's direction, but we must also be willing to put in the effort and use the resources He's given us. But Jacob's story also cautions us against becoming so comfortable in our current situation that we miss God's call to move forward. After years of working for Laban, God appears to Jacob again, telling him it's time to return to the land of his fathers. It would have been easy for Jacob to stay put. He had a large family, a prosperous business, and a settled life. But he recognized that his ultimate purpose was not to build an empire in Haran, but to fulfill God's plan for his life. Sometimes God's provision in one season is meant to prepare us for the next step of faith. I'm reminded of a time early in my own marriage when my wife and I were just starting in ministry. We were both college students with little money and no source of income, but we set out on a journey of faith, trusting God to meet our needs. One day we had no food in the house, the rent was due, and very little gas in our car. We didn't know what to do. We knelt and prayed. God, You called us to this ministry. There's no way that we can do what You've given us to do unless You provide for what we need. After praying, I went to the post office and there was a letter from a lady who wrote that she had been praying and God led her to send us money to meet our needs. That was enough to pay our rent, buy groceries, and put gas in the car. God was faithful. Since then, I have lived with a keen sense of God's faithfulness. But I've also learned the importance of stewarding His provision wisely. God's faithfulness does not negate our responsibility. Friends, whatever situation you find yourself in today, Know that the same God who provided for Jacob and Haran is able to provide for you. He sees you. He knows the desires of your heart, and He can do abundantly more than you could ask or imagine. But like Jacob, we have a part to play. We must seek God's wisdom, work diligently with what He's given us, and be willing to step out in faith when He calls us to something new. As you reflect on your own life, what is God calling you to trust Him for? What steps of faith is He asking you to take? Let's be like Jacob, trusting in God's faithfulness while also acting in obedience, for it's in that partnership of God's provision and human responsibility that we find the fullness of God's blessing.